In order to achieve this palazzo trouser, the first thing I did was to fold my fabric using the largest part of my lower body, which is my hips, plus 4 inches ease and sewing allowance. I measured out my the largest part of my body, which is my hips, 48 inches. 48 inches divided by 2, which gives me 12 inches plus 4 inches sewing and ease allowance. I now measured out my trouser length. I measured out my trouser length plus 1 inch sewing allowance. My trouser length is 38 inches plus 1 inch sewing allowance, making 39 inches. I made allowance for the 2 inches elastic waist at the waist elastic band, and I now use that to cut out the exact fabric that I needed for the front part of my trouser. And this is the fabric I needed to work on in order to achieve the front part of my trouser. The next thing is to begin to input my measurements. The first thing I did was to measure out my hips length from my waist to my hips, and I made allowance above my fabric for the 2 inches the 2 inches band for the elastic, because this trouser is going to have an elastic waist, and from my waist to my hips is 10 inches. I also mark out my crotch depth, which I got by dividing my hips by 4 plus 1 inch allowance. My hips is 48 inches, and divided by 4 gives me 12 inches plus 1 inches. So people had 1.5 inches. And I also mark out my thigh depth, which is 2 inches from my crotch depth. And this is me ruling out my line. I ruled out my hips line, my crotch depth, and also my thigh line, like so. You can also get your crotch depth by sitting on a chair and measuring from your waist to the top of the chair. Now this is me marking out my hips measurements. I use my hips measurement for my waist because I'm going to be inputting elastic band on the waist, and that is my hips divided by 4, which gives me 12 inches. I now transfer the same measurement to my hips and also to my crotch, and I ruled out my line like so. Now on my crotch line, I now have to divide my crotch measurement, my crotch width, which was 12 inches. I divided it again by 4, which gives me 3 inches. And is the 3 inches that I marked in front of my crotch line. Now came out by 1 inch at the corner of my crotch, where I now join my curve to my hip line from the crotch to the hip line. And that's what I mark out as my crotch extension. And I now connected my curve from the crotch to the hips line. Now the next thing is to mark my measurement on my lap, on the lap width there. Because I'm making a palazzo trouser, I cannot input my exact lap measurement. I have to transfer the measurement I have on my crotch to my lap, reducing it by 1 inch. I now decided to mark the middle of my crotch line and transfer it to my hips. I now distributed the measurement on the two sides of the line. I distributed it equally, having deducted 1 inch from the measurement. This is me joining the crotch to the lap, like so. You can see it in this manner. I now transfer this same measurement to my hem line. I transferred it to my hem line, making allowance for the deduction I made on the two end of the fabric. I now connected my hem line to my lap. to my lap line, to my thigh line, like so. This is what I have after marking out all my measurements. Now, the next thing is to come down by 0.5 inches at the front of the waist to make allowance for the waist curve, because the waist is not a straight line. So, and I now connected the line to the back of the front of the trouser, like so. And now this is me measuring out 3 inches by 8 inches for the pocket allowance, because I'm going to input pockets into this palazzo trouser. The next thing is to cut out the front part of our palazzo trouser, like so. Now I'm cutting it out. In order to make the back of the trouser, I folded another piece of fabric and laid upon it the front of my trouser, and the next thing is to input my measurements by extending the crotch line. I extended my crotch line by 3 inches onto the back of the knicker. I go up by 1.5 inches at the upper part of my waist in at the front, like you saw me doing. I now came out by 2 inches front of the trouser, like so, and this is me ruling my line. Now I'm connecting the 1.5 inches to the back of the knicker, the back of the trouser. The 1.5 inches at the front, I'm connecting it to the back of the trouser, and I'm also drawing my curve, my crotch curve, to join the hips line there. I'm also at the thigh area. I'm measuring out 1 inches allowance or at the back of the trouser, 1 inch allowance, and connecting it to my crotch point there. And this is me ruling my line for the back of the trouser to the hem of the trouser at the back, drawing out my hem line. This is what I have after marking on my line, and this is me cutting out the back of the trouser. Now this is what I have for the front and the back of the palazzo trouser. Now this is me cutting out the 0.5 inches waist depth that I mark on the front of my trouser fabric. I cut it out. Now the next thing is to stitch the front of the trouser from the crotch to the waist. I'll go to my sewing machine and stitch it down at that area from the waist to the top of the trouser. After stitching it down, this is what I have for the front of my palazzo trouser, and this is what I have for the back, having also stitched it down at the crotch area to the waist. Now the next thing is to cut out the fabric I needed for my pockets, for the two pockets of my trouser. and I'm measuring out a fabric of 10 inches by 12 inches. 10 inches by 12 inches. Unfold 12 inches, then by 10 inches length. I cut out one and I use it to cut out the second one for the trouser. Now this is me measuring out again my trouser allowance at the top of the front of the trouser. I measured out 3 inches and also measured out 7 inches at the side, like so. Now the next thing is to take one of the pieces of the fabric for the pocket and lay it at that side where I marked, right side facing the right side of the material for the front of the trouser. You lay it right side facing and also mark out or notch those area I measured out, the 3 inches by 7 inches mark. You notch it or you use your chalk and mark it out, matching it to the one underneath. Then I rule out this slant line where I'm going to stitch down. The next thing, I'll go to my sewing machine and stitch it down at that exact area that I chalk out. This is what I have after stitching it down. Now the next thing is to cut out that area where I stitch down. I'll cut it out. And this is what I have. Then I flip the material, the pocket material to the back of the fabric, and the next thing is to stitch over, to double stitch at that exact place where I stitched earlier on. Now I've also done it the same thing to the other pockets. Now this is what I have, having stitched it down the second time. Now the next thing is to push your fabric for your pocket to the back of the wrong side of the front of the trouser and fold it in, bringing it out like so. You bring out the edge of it in order to replace that area that we cut out from the trouser fabric. It's going to look like this after you fold it to the back. Now the next thing, I use my office pin to hold down the pocket fabric at the edge like so, and also at the top part of it in this manner. And this is what I have. You can see the fabric, and this is the back of it. This is what we are going to, this is what it will look like from the back. This is what you will have from the back. You can see the pocket fabric. Now the next thing we are going to do is to make a stitch on the pocket fabric only. You make a stitch like so, like the area that I chalked down from the folded side of the pocket. You make a stitch curving round in this manner at that exact place that I chalked down. The next thing is to go to my sewing machine and stitch it down. Now, having stitched them down, the next thing is to trim out the edge of the pocket like so. You trim it out like so. Now the next thing is to turn it inside out. I remove my office pin and turn the pocket inside out in this manner. You bring out the inside of your pocket like so. You make sure everything comes out very well. Then we are going to over stitch again. We are going to double stitch at that exact area that we stitched earlier on. We double stitch to make sure that our fabric is very tight. It cannot have a hole anytime soon. You do the same thing to the other side. Turn it inside out and double stitch it at the exact area that we stitched down earlier on. Now, having double stitched it, this is what I have. This is going to how it's going to look like. Now, the next thing is to return it to its former, uh, to the former way it was. You turn it inside, bringing the right side inside and laying it back at the back of the, laying it flat at the back of the front of the trouser, like so. You return it to its former place and also use your office pin to pin it down, and do the same thing to the other side. Pin it down with your office pin. After returning it to the back of the trouser. Now the next thing is to go to my sewing machine and tack down those area that I use a office pin to hold down. I'll put some stitches there to tack it down. You just tack it down with a few stitches to hold it down. Now this is what I have after tacking it down. You can see that the pocket is already in place. We already have a pocket in place there, and the back of it is looking like this. This is how you have the back of the trouser, and this is how the pocket looks like. Now the next thing is to take the back of the trouser, the back part of the trouser, lay it right side facing up, and take the front of the trouser and lay it on top of it, right side facing each other. The right side will be facing each other. Then you take the crotch area and match them together and stitch down the crotch area to the hem of the trouser. The two edges of the crotch area, stitch them down to the hem of the trouser. Then I will take the side of the trouser, mash them together, stitch them together, and also fold in the hem of the trouser. Fold them twice and hem them. This is what I have after stitching all those areas I mentioned earlier on. Now the next thing is to work on the waist of the trouser, and the first thing I need to do is to measure out the length of my waist, which will determine the fabric that I need and also the elastic that I'm going to need for the band. Now after measuring it out, this is my fabric that I already prepared for the band. I cut out 5 inches by a long length of fabric. Actually, I have two fabric here. I'm going to join them together to make up for the length that I measured. I measured out 54 inches length on that trouser waist. I'm going to join the two fabric to make up for the 54 inches, and then the width of the fabric is 5 inches, which will become 2.5 inches after folding it together. It will become 2.5 inches, and after joining it to the trouser, I will have 2 inches band. It will become 2 inches. And the first thing I did is to turn my trouser inside out, turn the trouser to the wrong side, and place the, you can see the band after folding it is going to become 2.5 inches. Now you are going to place the band right side facing the wrong side of the trouser. Place the wrong side of the trouser will be out. Then you place the right side of the band material that you cut on it and begin to pin it down round about the waist area, like so. You pin it down. There are several methods to attach a band to the waist of a trouser or skirt. I just decided to use this for this project. I pin down my band, the fabric for the band round the trouser. After pinning it down, this is what I have. Then by the time I go to my sewing machine, I'm going to sew it down, and then I will turn it over and stitch it again to the other side of to the right side of the trouser. Now, having stitched down that area that I pinned down, this is what I have. Now the next thing is to fold in the band. I decided to turn my trouser right side out. After turning it the right side, after bringing out the right side of the trouser, this is what I have. You can see the band. Now the next thing is to fold the band, the edge of the band. You fold it in by 0.5 inches or 0.25. Fold it in once, then fold it over the stitch that we made earlier on. The stitch that you made earlier on at the first time of attaching the band from the wrong side of the trouser. Fold the band over that stitch and begin to pin them down. Begin to pin it down round the waist of the trouser. Turn the band and fold it in by 0.5 inches and place that 0.5 inches up on top of that stitch that we made while attaching the band to the wrong side of the trouser. You begin to pin them down with your office pin, making sure that your band is exactly on top of the stitch in order for us to have at least 2 inches remaining from the band as part of the waist in order to complete our trouser length. This is me pinning it down carefully, making sure that I pin down on the stitch area only. Now, having stitched it down, this is what I have. Having pinned them down, this is what I have. The next thing is to go to my sewing machine and stitch it down all round about the trouser, making sure that I leave about 1 inch allowance where I'm going to insert the elastic band. Now this is what I have after stitching it down. I have already stitched down the band. This is how it's going to look like after stitching it down. I left about 1 inch space on the band where I did not stitch in order to be able to insert my elastic band into it. And for my elastic band, I cut my waist is 42 inches. I now decided to use an elastic band of 35 inches. I reduced my waist by 7 inches. I made sure that the band is a bit uh, shorter than my waist size in order for me to have a snug fit. Now the next thing is to attach a, a, a safety pin to the band and begin to insert it at that place where I did not close, that area of the band that I did not stitch close. I inserted the elastic band with the office pin and begin to pull it in and begin to push it in like so until I will come out at the opening side again. Now after inserting it, I decided to pull out my elastic and arrange the band. Now the next thing is to go to my machine and stitch down the elastic band, placing them on top of each other and stitch them down like so. After stitching it down, I will push it in and close up the area, that opening that I left the other side. Now this is what I have after stitching it close and finishing the band at the waist. This is the finished waist band. which marked the end of the project. And this is what I have. This is the palazzo pants. You can see how beautiful and neat it comes out with our pockets. This is what I have. Thank you very much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe. God bless you.